Right now at midday, the search for a gunman after police say a 9-year-old was executed and her mother hurt. Police say this started as a domestic disturbance between the mother and her ex-boyfriend. Good morning and thank you for joining us. I'm Andy Sirota.
And I'm Sophia Ojeda. The shooting happened at an apartment off Oxford Street and the Katy Freeway in the Heights. KPRC2's Brittany Jeffers is there live with what we are learning about the case. Brittany.
And we've been checking in with homicide detectives all morning long, and they tell us that right now the woman's ex-boyfriend is facing a capital murder and aggravated assault charge. They tell us at the time of the shooting that there were 3 children inside of that apartment, a 1-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 9-year-old who they say was shot and killed.
June 13th, 2022. A night that started like any other. Laughter, warmth, and the small, beautiful chaos of family life. But in the span of just a few minutes, that laughter would fade, replaced by screams that would echo through the walls and through the hearts of an entire community. This is the story of 9-year-old Kylie Sorrells, a girl full of life, courage, and dreams. A girl who loved her sisters fiercely, adored her mother endlessly, and saw the world as a playground waiting for her laughter. But love, as pure as it was in that home, would soon collide with a darkness determined to destroy it. Before we dive into the case, take a second to subscribe to City Crime Tales and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss the stories that remind us how fragile peace can be. Because on that quiet night, something unthinkable was already set in motion. A knock that never came. A presence that refused to stay away. And within those few walls, a love story between a mother and her daughters was about to be tested in the most horrifying way imaginable. To understand what happened inside that apartment, and how one man's obsession would shatter 3 lives, we have to go back. Back to when it all began, when love and trust were still unbroken. To understand the heartbreak that would follow, we have to understand the world Kylie Sorrells came from. A world built on love, laughter, and the fierce determination of a mother who refused to let hardship define her daughters' lives. Born in 2012, Kylie was a lovable and cheerful kid. Every morning before school, Kylie made it her mission to be the first one up. Not for cartoons, not for herself, but to make sure her baby sister was safe and her older sister was smiling. It was just who she was, protective, patient, and full of light. At school, Kylie's energy was magnetic. Her teacher said she was fearless, confident but kind, the kind of girl who stood up for her friends and never hesitated to lend a hand. Her dream was simple: to grow up, play college basketball, and make TikTok videos with her sisters. But behind that easy smile was a strength far beyond her years, a strength she learned from the woman who raised her. Brittany Sorrells was a fighter. A single mother of 3 girls, working long hours in Houston's competitive beauty industry, hairstylist by trade, provider by heart. From early mornings to late nights, she was the kind of mother who made sure her daughters never felt her exhaustion, even when the bills piled high and the nights felt long. There was never a moment too small for her to show love. Bedtime hugs, late-night talks, morning rides to school filled with laughter and silly songs. She didn't have much, but what she gave was everything that mattered: safety, affection, and a sense of belonging. To outsiders, it might have looked like an ordinary life, 3 girls in a modest apartment, but inside those walls lived something extraordinary. A bond unshakable, unbreakable. And Kylie was the heart of it all. Kylie's 7-year-old sister was the artist of the family, shy, thoughtful, always sketching in her notebook. She loved drawing cards for their mom, filled with hearts and stick figure smiles, always signing them, "Love you forever." And then there was the baby, barely over 1. The light of the family. Her laughter could erase a bad day in seconds. Together, they were everything their mother ever dreamed of: a team, a trio, a promise that the future could still be bright. Home videos. The girls dancing to TikTok songs in their living room, their mom recording with tears of laughter in her eyes. Everywhere Kylie went, joy followed. Her classmates remember her as the girl who encouraged others when they missed a shot, the one who always said, "Try again, you've got this." Even at 9 years old, she carried herself like someone who had already learned what love could overcome. But even in this picture of warmth, small cracks were beginning to form. A name. A presence. Someone new stepping into their lives. someone who at first seemed like comfort, but would soon become a storm. Before long, that warmth, that love, would be tested by a darkness none of them could have predicted. A darkness that began, as it so often does, with a smile. It began the way these stories so often do, quietly. No one saw the danger at first because it didn't arrive wearing a mask. It came disguised as attention, affection, and the promise of stability. In August of 2021, Brittany Sorrells met Jeremiah Jones. He was charming, confident, the kind of man who said all the right things. He told her she worked too hard, that she deserved rest, that he could make life easier for her and her girls. After years of doing everything alone, that kind of promise sounded like hope. At first, he showed up with small gestures, bringing lunch to her salon, offering to watch the girls so she could work late, calling her queen, telling her no one had ever treated him as kindly as she did. For a single mother constantly stretched between survival and exhaustion, that kind of attention felt like relief. But what Brittany didn't yet realize was that every kindness had a string attached, and every compliment was a step closer to control. Charm, after all, is often the first weapon an abuser draws. Within weeks, Brittany's friends noticed the change. She stopped answering texts. She canceled plans. Her mother said her laughter sounded forced. When she did speak, she defended him, said he was protective, that he just worried about her safety. But worry soon became monitoring. Concern became control. Jones wanted to know where she was, who she was with, and why. He'd text her constantly, demanding replies within minutes. When she didn't respond fast enough, he accused her of lying, of hiding something. The calls turned sharp, his voice colder, angrier, unpredictable. Behind closed doors, he began to criticize her job, her clothes, even her parenting. He'd tell her that no one else cared for her the way he did. That friends only used her. That family turned their back on her. Slowly, methodically, he was isolating her, cutting every tie that didn't connect to him. Isolation is the quietest form of violence. It doesn't leave bruises. It leaves distance. And before Brittany realized it, she was standing alone in a life that used to be full of love and noise. But Jeremiah Jones wasn't just possessive. He was dangerous. Court records later revealed a violent past. A known gang member with a 15-year criminal record. Assaults, threats, weapons charges, and a history of violating protective orders time and time again. Each time the system gave him another chance. Each time he walked out of court with a bond, free to try again. It's a pattern that's far too familiar. A man with a violent history, a woman seeking protection, and a justice system that mistakes paperwork for safety. Brittany began to live in a constant state of alert. She changed her phone number more than once. She called police when he showed up uninvited, pounding on her door, shouting through the walls. Reports were filed. Officers came and went. But the problem wasn't lack of evidence, it was lack of consequence. Jones was always one step ahead of accountability. When arrested, he'd make bond within days. When told to stay away, he'd find ways to accidentally cross paths with her. When confronted, he'd apologize, cry, swear he just wanted his family back. And every apology was followed by the same cycle: sweetness, anger, control, then violence. There were nights Brittany would call her mother in tears, whispering that she felt watched, that she saw someone lingering outside the apartment. Sometimes there really was someone there. A figure in the parking lot. A car engine running too long. She'd lock the doors, hold her daughters close, and pray he wouldn't come knocking. Her friends begged her to leave the city, but how could she? She had work, school, and her children's lives to protect. Leaving didn't feel like safety, it felt like surrender. And for Brittany, surrender was never an option. Every warning sign was there. Every call, every restraining order, every red flag waving in plain sight. But the system failed her. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. Each time Jones was released, his obsession grew. His need for power deepened. His threats became promises waiting to be fulfilled. By early 2022, his messages turned darker. He accused her of betrayal, of ruining his life. He said she'd regret leaving him. And soon, regret would no longer be a word. It would become a reality that would haunt her forever. The control wasn't just emotional anymore, it became technological. Jones learned her routine, knew when she worked, when the girls were home, even when she tried to block him. He followed her through social media, watched her stories, left cryptic comments that made her heart race each time his name appeared on her screen. No matter how far she tried to run, his presence lingered. That's the thing about abusers. They don't just haunt your doorstep, they haunt your peace. And Brittany was living in a constant state of fear, wrapped in false calm, pretending to her daughters that everything was fine, even when the knock she dreaded echoed in her dreams. By the spring of 2022, Brittany finally made the hardest decision of all, to leave him for good. She changed her locks, cut off contact, and tried to rebuild the quiet, safe life she'd once had. But for Jeremiah Jones, no wasn't a boundary. It was a challenge. He began showing up again, at her apartment, at her job, outside her building. Each encounter left her shaking. Each time she called the police. Each time he was taken in and released. And each time he came back angrier. Every system meant to protect her failed. Every promise of safety turned hollow. And what began as a relationship had now become a manhunt, one man's obsession with control, and one woman's desperate attempt to stay alive. The danger was no longer distant. It was on her doorstep, circling closer each night. What Brittany didn't know was that by June, that obsession would reach its breaking point. And when it did, the consequences wouldn't just fall on her. It would reach the one person she loved most, the little girl who had always tried to protect everyone else. The night of June 6th, he came armed with a gun. He made a threat so direct it froze her blood. He said, "I'm going to kill you." She believed him. She called the police. She begged for protection. But it wasn't enough. And just 1 week later he came back. Silence. Then a single heartbeat. The night everything changed forever was already approaching, and no one could stop it. By the spring of 2022, the walls of safety Brittany had built were crumbling. Every door she locked, every number she changed, every prayer she whispered, it all began to feel useless. Because no matter what she did, Jeremiah Jones always found his way back. He told her he couldn't live without her. Then in the next breath told her she'd pay for leaving him. The charm was gone now, replaced by rage. His words, once soft and flattering, now struck like knives. "You think you can run? You think you can take my family from me?" He'd appear outside her apartment with that same cold stare, waiting, watching. Neighbors would see him pacing near her door, muttering to himself, sometimes holding his phone up, recording. And every time Brittany called for help, she got the same answer: "We'll send someone to take a report." Each time police arrived, Jones was already gone. Each time a warrant was issued, he somehow slipped through. And each time the system let him go, his sense of power grew stronger. By now, Brittany was exhausted. Her sleep came in short bursts, her nerves on edge. She'd keep the lights on until dawn, the baby's crib pulled closer to her bed, her phone clutched in her hand in case she needed to call 911 again. Even when Jones wasn't there, his shadow was. Kylie, at just 9 years old, began to notice. She'd see her mother jump at sudden noises, see her stare too long at the window and ask softly, "Mommy, are you scared?" Brittany would smile, force a laugh and say, "No, baby. Mommy's just tired." But deep down she was terrified, because she knew what he was capable of. She'd seen it in his eyes, heard it in his voice when he said the words no one forgets. "I'll kill you. I'll kill you and everyone you love." June 6, 2022. The threat became reality. Jones showed up at Brittany's apartment, angry, armed, and unpredictable. He confronted her, shouting accusations, waving his gun like it was an extension of his fury. Brittany called the police, trembling, holding her phone so tightly it nearly cracked in her hand. Officers responded, reports were filed. But Jones walked away once again, free, unrestrained, and angrier than ever. And that's when the countdown began. After that night, Brittany lived in constant survival mode. She told friends she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. She made plans to move. She started sleeping in the same room as her girls, keeping them close, her shoulder pressed against the door, as if her presence alone could hold back what was coming. Each noise in the hallway made her heart race. Each knock at the door made her stomach turn. She checked the peephole before unlocking anything, every single time. Because deep down she knew, when a man like Jones makes a promise to kill, it isn't a threat. It's a plan. Kylie noticed more changes now. The laughter in their home was quieter. Her mom's phone was always on silent. The curtains stayed closed even in daylight. Kylie would whisper to her little sister at night, telling her that everything was okay the way her mom used to. In her own way, she became the protector, innocent, unaware that she was already standing in the path of danger meant for someone else. Meanwhile, Jones's behavior spiraled. He stalked Brittany's social media, followed her movements, showed up where she least expected him. He texted her from new numbers, each message darker than the last. When she blocked one, another appeared. When she didn't answer, he'd send threats. And every time she tried to rebuild even a moment of peace, his name flashed across her screen again like a curse she couldn't erase. By mid-June, Jones had reached a breaking point. He was consumed by jealousy, furious that Brittany had moved on, that her daughters filled her world in a way he never could. Friends later said he spoke as if he owned her, as if she and her children were property he could reclaim or destroy at will. He told people that if he couldn't have her, no one would. And that kind of obsession doesn't fade, it festers. It waits for opportunity. And soon opportunity came knocking. June 13, 2022. The day began like so many others. Sunlight poured through the blinds. The girls played. Brittany worked. Nothing seemed unusual. But in the background, unseen, Jones was watching, planning, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He knew where she lived. He knew how to get in. And he knew that inside that apartment were the three people who gave Brittany every reason to keep living. As evening approached, the city lights flickered on outside. Inside, Brittany tucked her daughters into bed, turned on a movie, and for the first time in days, allowed herself to breathe. The laughter returned, soft, tired, but real. Kylie snuggled next to her mother, whispering, "I love you, Mommy." Brittany kissed her forehead, whispering, "I love you more." But while love filled that small room, hate was already on its way. Jeremiah Jones was in motion, driven by rage, jealousy, and the delusion that if he couldn't have control, he'd have revenge. Every warning sign had been flashing for months. Every system that should have stopped him had looked the other way. And now the inevitable was closing in, step by step, heartbeat by heartbeat. The storm was coming. And it would arrive that very night. Because when obsession turns to fury, and fury meets opportunity, there's no turning back. This is where the story breaks. Where the monster finally steps through the door. June 13, 2022, Houston, Texas. For Brittany Sorrells and her daughters, it began as an ordinary night. Dinner. Dishes. Laughter. The kind of simple, perfect night that makes you forget, even for a few hours, that danger ever existed. The girls had spent the evening piled together on their mother's bed, watching TV, giggling at a cartoon they'd seen 100 times. Kylie, as always, played the role of big sister, making her siblings laugh, sharing snacks, turning bedtime into a small adventure. For a few hours, peace returned. The storm that had hovered for months finally felt far away. Outside, the city was quiet. The air was thick, still, and heavy with summer heat. Somewhere in that silence, a man was moving with purpose. Jeremiah Jones had spent the day watching, waiting, convincing himself of what he would do next. He drove toward the apartment complex he wasn't supposed to be near, the same place where police had told him never to return. He came armed, fueled by rage, jealousy, and a twisted sense of ownership. He wasn't coming to talk. He was coming to end something. Inside, Brittany didn't know that the nightmare she had feared for so long was now minutes away. She was lying beside her daughters, their soft breathing filling the room. Kylie's small hand rested against her mother's arm. The baby shifted in her sleep. And for a fleeting moment, everything felt safe. Then, a sound. A faint creak. The door. Jones forced his way in, armed and furious. He moved through the dark apartment like a ghost, quiet, calculated, unstoppable. Brittany's heart froze when she saw him standing in the doorway, gun in hand, his face twisted in rage. The girls woke up to the sound of his voice, shouting, accusing, demanding. He wanted her phone, her TV, her attention. But what he really wanted was control. Brittany tried to reason with him, tried to protect her children, begged him to leave. Her voice trembled as she told him the girls were scared. She told him to think about them, about Kylie, about the innocence in those small faces. But reasoning with a man consumed by obsession is like whispering into a storm. He turned the gun toward her. A flash. Bang. She felt the bullet tear into her shoulder, the shock knocking her backward. She fell, clutching her wound, her mind spiraling through panic and disbelief. And then in the chaos, came the sound that every parent fears most, a child's scream. Kylie stood between her mother and the man who had become their nightmare. She begged him to stop. Her voice, tiny, shaking, desperate, echoed through that small apartment. But he didn't listen. In that single, unthinkable moment, he turned the gun toward the child who had only ever known how to love. And he pulled the trigger. The shot silenced everything. No words, no cries, just a ringing void where laughter used to live. Brittany tried to crawl to her daughter, but her strength was fading. She screamed for help, her voice breaking through the walls, through the night, through every barrier that had failed her before. Neighbors called 911. Police and medics raced to the scene. But inside, time had already stopped. Kylie, 9 years old, full of dreams, full of light, was gone. When officers arrived, they found Brittany wounded, trembling, covered in blood, clutching the baby in one arm and reaching toward the space where Kylie lay. Her pain wasn't just physical. It was the kind that shatters something inside a person forever. Jones had already fled. He ran into the night, leaving behind the wreckage of everything he claimed to love. But even in escape, he couldn't outrun the truth. Because from that moment on, he wasn't just a man. He was a fugitive, hunted by the same system that had once set him free. Police launched a citywide manhunt. His name and face filled every news screen. Tips poured in. He'd abandoned his car, his phone, everything but the weapon that had stolen a child's life. As officers closed in, the city held its breath. People lit candles outside the apartment complex. They brought flowers, teddy bears, notes that read, "Fly high, Kylie." The air was heavy with grief and disbelief, because how could this happen after so many warnings? How could a mother who begged for help still end up losing everything? The night of June 13th wasn't just another domestic violence case. It was the moment every failure, every ignored report, every lenient bond, came crashing together into one irreversible tragedy. And in its wake, a family was destroyed, a community shaken, and a question left hanging in the air. How many more times will the system fail to listen? Brittany would survive the gunshot. But survival in this case wasn't healing, it was punishment. Because every breath she took after that night was a reminder of what she couldn't save. She would later tell investigators that Kylie was her protector, her helper, her heart. And even in those last moments, that little girl stood for love, trying to protect her mother, unaware that the world was about to take her away. That's the cruelty of obsession. It doesn't just end lives, it destroys everything that love ever built. And for Jeremiah Jones, that destruction wasn't enough. He wanted to be remembered for the pain he caused. But in the end, all he proved was how powerful love can be, even in tragedy. Because the truth is, the world didn't remember his name for long. But they remembered hers. Kylie Sorrells, the little girl who loved her family so fiercely that even in her final moments, that love refused to break. When the sirens stopped and the lights faded from the parking lot, the silence that followed was unbearable. Inside that apartment, love had been turned into loss, and the world that once revolved around three little girls had been reduced to one mother, alone, holding memories instead of her child. Brittany Sorrells survived the gunshot that night, but the wound that nearly killed her wasn't the one in her shoulder, it was the one in her heart. In the hospital, she asked again and again if Kylie was okay. No one could answer her at first. When the truth finally came, the world went still. A scream echoed through those sterile halls, raw, breaking, endless. It was the sound of a mother realizing that everything she had built, everything she had protected, was gone. While Brittany fought to stay alive, the city around her reacted in shock. News alerts flashed across phones and televisions. A 9-year-old girl shot to death. A suspect on the run. People who had never heard of the Sorrells family found themselves crying at the sight of Kylie's smiling school photo. Her missing tooth, her bright eyes, her joy frozen in time. Neighbors gathered outside the apartment complex, lighting candles, leaving flowers, writing messages in chalk on the sidewalk. Rest easy, Kylie. You are loved. Justice will come. Houston police moved fast. Detectives who had read Brittany's prior complaints now saw the pattern they'd missed. The restraining orders, the ignored calls, the repeated warnings. They knew who they were looking for. Jeremiah Jones, a man with a record long enough to fill pages, a history of threats, and a final act of pure cruelty. For 2 days he ran. He hid in abandoned houses, jumped fences, begged acquaintances for rides. But no matter where he went, his name followed. Every news station, every patrol car, every phone in the city buzzing with his image. Houston had turned against him. He even went on live TV to deny the allegations, but it was all futile. On June 15, 2022, police finally cornered him. He was captured without a fight, as if even he knew there was nowhere left to go. In that moment, there was no rage left, no power, no control. Only a man who had destroyed the very thing that had once loved him most. The arrest brought relief but not peace. Because justice, even when it comes, can't restore what's gone. For Brittany, justice was seeing him in handcuffs. But what she really wanted was something no court could give her. Another morning with her daughter, another laugh, another hug goodnight. In the months that followed, the community rallied around her. Friends helped her move. Strangers donated money to help her rebuild. And yet, every room in her new home felt too quiet. Every sunset reminded her of what the world had taken. Kylie's school held a vigil. Her classmates released pink and white balloons into the evening sky, each one carrying a message written in a child's handwriting. I miss you, Kylie. You were my best friend. Fly high, angel. Teachers cried. Parents held their children tighter. And for one night, an entire community stood still, realizing that what happened to Kylie could have happened to anyone, that behind every protective order, there's a plea for safety that too often goes unheard. As the case moved through the courts, prosecutors built their argument piece by piece. The history of violence, the repeated violations, the failures that allowed Jones to walk free. They called it what it was: premeditated, cruel, and preventable. And when the verdict came, the sentence wasn't just punishment, it was an acknowledgement of every system that should have done more. But even with a guilty verdict, there's no victory in a story like this. Because justice, when it comes after death, always feels too late. In interviews later, Brittany spoke softly, her voice fragile yet steady. She said Kylie was her light, her leader, her best friend. She said she hoped her story would help other women recognize the signs earlier, trust their instincts, and never stop fighting for protection. Her words weren't filled with anger, but with purpose. She wanted her daughter's name to mean something more than tragedy. And it did. Across Houston, conversations about domestic violence began again. Victims came forward. Organizations strengthened their advocacy. Kylie's story became a symbol, not of death, but of awareness, a reminder that love should never have to fear survival. Every tragedy leaves two legacies: the act itself and what we choose to do with it. For Brittany, for her surviving daughters, and for everyone who watched this story unfold, that choice was clear: to remember Kylie not for the horror of her final moments, but for the joy she brought into the world. Because even now, years later, when people speak her name, they don't talk about the man who ended her life. They talk about the girl who laughed without fear, who protected her family with a courage far beyond her age, and who left behind a light no act of violence could ever fully extinguish. And so, justice was served, on paper at least. But true justice will only exist when no mother has to bury a child for loving too deeply, for trusting too soon, or for being left unprotected by the very systems meant to keep them safe. Time moves forward, but for Brittany Sorrells, June 13, 2022, never truly ended. Every breath, every heartbeat, still echoes with the memory of her daughter, 9 years old, bright, fearless, and gone far too soon. Kylie's room remains untouched. Her basketball rests by the door, her drawings still hang on the walls, her laughter still seems to linger in the corners of that small apartment. Sometimes, Brittany walks in and sits on the edge of the bed, running her fingers over the soft blankets Kylie once tucked her sisters into. It's a place frozen in love, the kind of love that death can't take away. Her surviving daughters are growing, slowly learning how to live in a world their big sister is no longer part of. The middle child still draws angels with brown hair and bright eyes, and the baby, now a little older, points at photos and says her sister's name like a prayer. Outside their home, Houston still remembers. The apartment complex that once echoed with sirens now fills with candles every June. Strangers who never met Kylie stop to leave flowers, teddy bears, and notes that read, "You are not forgotten. Your light still shines." In the wake of tragedy, something powerful happened. Kylie's story began to spread beyond her city, to communities across the country, to people who recognize themselves in Brittany's pain, to mothers and daughters learning that silence can be deadly, and awareness can save a life. And before we continue, take a moment, if this story has touched you, to subscribe to City Crime Tales and turn on notifications. We tell these stories not just to remember, but to protect, to give voice to those who can't speak for themselves. And please share Kylie's story with your friends and family, because awareness only grows when we pass it on. Brittany Sorrell still speaks softly about her daughter. Her voice carries both grief and grace. She doesn't talk about the night itself. She talks about the mornings Kylie used to wake her sisters, about the dream she had of becoming a basketball star, about the joy she brought into a life that had seen far too much pain. In every interview she says the same thing. If sharing Kylie's story saves even one child, even one mother, then her daughter's light still lives on. And that is the kind of legacy no tragedy can erase. In that sound, you can still feel her presence, her energy, her laughter carried on the warm Houston wind. Kylie Sorrell's story isn't just about a crime, it's about love, resilience, and the strength of a mother who refused to let her daughter be forgotten. Her name is now a reminder that every cry for help deserves to be heard, and every act of violence leaves ripples that reach far beyond the moment itself. So tonight, as you turn off this video and return to your life, hold her story close. Talk about it. Share it. Remind someone you love that protection, awareness, and compassion can save lives. Because Kylie's story isn't just hers, it belongs to every family who's ever loved and lost, and to every survivor still fighting to be heard. Remember her for how she lived, with laughter, courage, and love that outshines even the darkest night.